This Week in Agribusiness, serving America's most essential industry, is brought to you by Case IH.
Coming up on This Week in Agribusiness, farmers across the country continue to wait for rain. Hello folks, thanks for joining us for This Week in Agribusiness. I'm Mike Pearson in the studio this week along with Max Armstrong. And Max, farmers across the country still looking at parched ground nearly everywhere.
You know, even when a producer gets rain, it seems like he or she is pointing out that just a couple of miles away, there was no rain on some of the other fields that they've been operating on.
It's patchy, to say the least.
Yeah, we'll talk with Greg Solier a little bit later about that to try to get a handle on how the weather looks over the next few weeks. I think his feeling has been that those shower opportunities were going to be a little more frequent, and maybe some growers would get some help. We talked about it the other day with a technical service representative for BASF. We were out of the field in central Illinois, where we visited with Dan Waldstein.
We've seen a lot of hit and miss in terms of rain coming through, and there's pockets that have done fairly well and got some spot showers here and there. There's others that have really struggled. I would say, from the areas I've seen, I haven't been across the whole Midwest, but parts of Nebraska, especially the eastern part, if it's not irrigated, it's in real drought stress scenario where they're pretty desperate for rain. There's certainly dry spots in Iowa and Illinois and some of the Midwest states as well. We're hoping for those summer rains to come through. I think we still have some great crop potential in terms of yield. And I think the genetics are pretty durable against some drought stress. So I would say to a farmer, encouraging words, don't give up yet. We still got a ways to go. I'd say we're still, maybe 5 innings in a 9-inning baseball game. So stick it out and keep doing what you need to do to be successful this year.
Those late innings in soybean fields can really make a difference too, can't they? And even in corn, in the late development of the corn crop, if the rains suddenly turn on in July and August.
Yeah, and I think we've seen that before where we've had a dry May and June, and then all of a sudden the rain kicks on in July and into August. And there's some later planted corn that still has some opportunities, I think, but certainly soybeans have a long way to go. So yeah, I would say try to be optimistic and let's pray for rain.
Where we were talking with Dan Waldstein at Seymour, Illinois, wasn't that many miles away from the Farm Progress Show site at Decatur, Illinois. And the roadsides, the ditches, the yards are quite dry. Matt Youngman, Farm Progress Show manager, pointed out the fields don't look that bad.
The field demonstration crops went in perfectly on time. Last year was a struggle and we weren't able to actually do field demos. Now, this corn went in the ground on April 14th, and we plant a really early hybrid, obviously, to be sure that we're going to have demonstrations at the end of August, and everything is clicking along. The growing season in central Illinois has been pretty rough. The early planted corn got some roots down and has withstood the drought awfully well, surprisingly well, actually. When you look at the yards and the road banks as you drive here towards Decatur, it's kind of amazing how good this corn looks. So we're thankful for that. Have gotten just a couple of little rains here and there, and so things are in great shape for field demonstrations.
Matt mentioned early hybrids were planted there at the Farm Progress Show site, so they'll have something to harvest at show time in the demonstration fields. The same thing was done at the Half Century of Progress show site. We were out there with our friend Russell Bohr, co-director of the show, as he walked the fields with me.
Considering what we've had, the crops really are looking good. I think the cool nights have helped us out quite a bit. Like I say, we can go out in the field and you can see the cracks of the ground, how dry it's been, but it's amazing how the crops have looked, with this kind of weather that we've had. I don't know what it looked like 30 years ago with the kind of crops and stuff we would have had then. The genetics is just so much different these days. It's just really something that we've got here. So the beans, like say, you could see them, they've been sprayed not too long ago again, but there's a lot of blooms and stuff on them. So we're hoping for good stuff, that we can combine here coming in late August.
So we go back in time with the equipment, but not necessarily in terms of the plant genetics. We rely heavily on modern technology there.
Boy, that does make a difference. It really does. In 1988, we didn't have this kind of stuff, and we're about in that same kind of boat right now. If we get a rain pretty soon, I think everything all of a sudden is going to grow and really look good again.
Walking out across that expansive old Air Force base with Russell Bohr, I was reminded how soon that show will be coming along, less than 2 months from now. The Half Century of Progress is the 24th through the 27th of August. There's one down day, and then the Big Farm Progress Show is the 29th through the 31st. We'll be at both of those shows. I'll be at both of them every minute of every day, and look forward to seeing many of you folks there.
This portion of This Week in Agribusiness is brought to you by Firestone Ag. The Firestone Ag Dealer Network offers you the support, inventory, and resources you need. Visit firestoneag.com to find your local certified dealer. Now it's time to talk markets. Joining us this week is Brian Splitt of agmarket.net. And Brian, thanks for joining us this week.
Thanks for having me as always, Mike.
It has been a volatile month and a half in the grain markets, Brian. We've seen huge moves, corn, soybeans, and wheat on a daily basis. From your perspective, watching these charts, how do you handle this kind of volatility in the markets?
Yeah, so charting in a weather market can be very difficult, and I think what you really, all you can do is monitor certain points on the chart that you know are important. Those tend to be acceleration zones or resistance levels. So, for example, on the rally, 576 and a quarter was the high from the quarterly stock report that we have, the planting intentions and the acres. And when we got through that, we really accelerated, and it took us just a couple more days to see those highs just under 630. So what's important is to identify those levels, and then when you get through them, that's where I use options, and I want to use those levels as my strike prices for puts. And if we can clear a level and get through it, if I have puts below the market, I now want to move my puts higher to that next level. So really, it's very difficult. In a calm market, you might be able to say, hey, if we get through here, we should go to here. In a weather market, you really have to just identify those key zones and then use options to protect them.
Be aggressive when you get into that territory, it sounds like, Brian. But then, of course, sometimes weather rallies move on. We might be in that state here. Big drops in corn and soybeans this past week. Where do you think the trade is anticipating as we look forward?
Well, I would say that one thing that we've done that was an objective below the market when we were up at those highs was to fill the gap at 533, which has been accomplished. And so hopefully that level is an area where the funds say, you know what, we've broken almost $1 off those highs. We still have some unknowns in front of us. I believe as we go into July with that WASDE report, the trade is going to be expecting a drop in yield. It's absolutely warranted, and we'll see if it's a surprise or not. Hopefully it's lower than what the trade thinks and what they priced in, and maybe that gives us a little bit of a rally, but I do think we're in an environment now where rallies are selling opportunities. I am still long-term bearish as we head into fall.
I was wondering about that big Brazilian crop that they are bringing out of the field right now. Brian, is that why you're bearish as we head into fall?
That's one of the reasons, and so you think about soybeans, for example, and the big soybean crop that we had in Brazil. And so look at what our exports are doing. We've got a new crop book of about 3 million tons versus 13 million tons last year. And I think that's a big product of the size of the Brazilian soy crop. So carry that forward to corn. Corn isn't as far as behind last year. We got a little over 3 million tons on the books versus a little over 6 last year. But now we've got that South American crop coming out, and it's going to be available to the world market. So I think our deficiency versus last year is going to grow a little bit over the months to come.
Brian, how are you handling new crop now that the rally may have passed? Are you aggressively selling in here, or are you watching to see if we can rebuild some momentum?
I would like to see if maybe we could rebuild some momentum to the upside. I don't know if this is going to be a straight down type of a market. I still think there's a lot of unknowns out there that this market's going to want to price in. I think it's going to be very volatile. It could be violent at times. But it's one of those things where, depending on where you are in your marketing scheme, may not be a bad idea to have some short-term puts under the market, because if the rains that we are starting to get continue, I think the fund manager is going to see that as a big change in the weather pattern. And a lot of times these droughts that we're in, when they break in summer, they break rather violently. And so if that's the case, we could have a very negative July long-term into August. And then I think you're going to be looking at the possibility for maybe the yield to go right back up in the August report. So I think maybe get a little short-term strength, but I think going into August, we're probably going to see a continued downtrend.
And that's just in corn. We'll talk more in the grains when we return. This portion of This Week in Agribusiness is brought to you by Firestone Ag. Harvey Firestone invented the first pneumatic farm tire, forever changing what it means to farm hard. Visit firestoneag.com to learn more about this history and tire solutions for today. We're back talking markets with Brian Splitt of agmarket.net. And Brian, I'd like to turn the attention over to the wheat market. We've seen that same rally sell-off happen there. How are you handling wheat heading into summer?
Much the same. Again, identifying key points, key levels below the market that need to be protected. But wheat's a crop also with this rally, and it's into harvest, right? So this is a little bit different than the rally for corn, where this is an opportunity for producers that are harvesting currently to just sell it off out of the field. One of the things that we're also looking at is the cost of money. The Fed's probably going to raise interest rates another couple times into the end of the year. So holding onto a crop, and wheat's not a crop that producers typically hold anyway, maybe for some short-term basis plays. But I suspect you're probably going to see, especially with this rally, some good selling out of the field. And that'll probably carry over into corn and soybeans as we get into fall, where, again, the cost of money, there's bills that need to be paid, and we may see more of a strong harvest low this year than we've seen in previous years. We typically might bottom out a little earlier, maybe in August and September, but I think you're going to continue to see quite a bit of selling in those crops as we get through the fields.
All right, Brian, I want to turn our attention over to the soybean market. Same story, rally, weather-driven fear. Now it's coming back off. How are you handling new crop soybean sales looking ahead?
Well, new crop soybeans hit some very key levels on that rally. That 1350 to 1380 was a really key zone to see some selling. Big picture, I still think that there's a potential weather market ahead again for soybeans. It's a little too early for us to get excited about beans, but as we get through late July into August, that's when we're going to be really getting into the pod fill stage for beans, the reproductive stage. And so I think you could still see a bit of volatility late in the summer. That may give you an opportunity to do some late season marketing on corn, but beans will likely be the leader of a rally if it does happen in that late July, August period. So again, much the same. With the amount of volatility that we're using, I've been trying to keep it where we're using quite a bit of options. It's hard to step into a future position and then watch it go a buck against you, and you're paying margin. And we already talked about the cost of money, so I think producers are a little bit more margin adverse this growing season, maybe compared to the last 2, 3, 4 growing seasons.
Brian, in that soybean side, are you concerned about demand as we get farther into fall?
I'm concerned about demand, yes, because our export demand has been poor, right? We've got a book of 3 million tons versus 13 million tons last year. But I do think that could also be a double-edged sword. We're so far behind, but then maybe when the buying does start, we've got a lot of catch-up work to do. So it's not something I want to be bullish about now, but I do think if the buying comes in, we could actually see a pretty good run from China. And there's been some rumors lately of maybe some business out of the PNW for September. So I think you're going to start to see the Brazilian bean crop working in the market quite a bit. And then the Chinese are going to need to buy some U.S. soybeans, especially around harvest, to get them to that next Brazilian crop.
All right, might be some opportunities there as we get deeper into this summer and fall. We've been talking with Brian Splitt of agmarket.net. And market watchers, we're also anticipating a pair of reports from the USDA, and we got that data on Friday. And as Brian mentioned, sometimes these reports can surprise the market. That seemed to be the case on Friday, with the big surprise coming in the acreage report. Traders went in anticipating USDA to say 91.853 million acres went in the ground in 2023. USDA instead told us American farmers planted 94.1 million acres, making the 2023 corn crop the largest planted in America since 1944. With that many corn acres going in the ground, there were 5% fewer bean acres, according to the USDA. Their tally had us at 83.5 million acres, down from the trade's anticipated 87.673 number. That surprise moved the trade on Friday. In wheat, few changes, with that all-wheat acreage coming in at 49.6 million acres. In the quarterly grain stocks report, the numbers were friendly to all classes of commodity. Corn stockpiles a little tighter than trade had anticipated at 4.106 billion bushels. Similar story in soybeans. Trade was anticipating 812 million bushels on hand. USDA tallied 796, and in wheat as well. Total on-hand stockpiles 580 million bushels, as opposed to the 611 expected by traders.
Colby Ag Tech is brought to you by Copperhead Ag Products. Visit copperheadag.com for more information. I want a drone someday, but it would be just a toy for me. But the utility for farmers is amazing.
It is, Max, and they're finding ways to make it pay, particularly in a year like this. Chad shows us here.
Drones are certainly a lot more than a tool to take pretty pictures. The data they create in agriculture or construction or whatever the industry is, that's really what it's all about. And in farming, can it help us ground truth? Can it find us problems and send us to that location? Of course they can. The better part is the technology exists, and if you want to fly several thousand acres today, you can use a drone like the Quanix, or maybe you want the simplicity of a quadcopter. These are two examples I have, and you might be wondering what's different between the two. The long and short of it is one has a little better camera, one flies a little longer, one has a better controller. That's the short story. Kind of like getting on an airplane. Some airplanes are bigger and smaller depending on the mission. You can see the camera size is different right there. But to create the data, that's the easy part today. That bigger drone of the two, you can see it has an integrated screen right here. I hit start flight, drone takes off, comes back and lands. No big deal. On that smaller drone, it's going to utilize other technology you have, your smartphone, or maybe even a tablet. But the thing I told the company called Drone Deploy when they first began is we need real-time data in agriculture. And guess what? They do that all the time now. It works seamlessly. When you get it back to your computer, though, you can do a lot of things with it. It's pretty easy to get some great elevation maps. That bigger drone of the two even has the ability to drop on an RTK module on it, and that'll give you sub-inch accuracy in a drone. Both of those drones will do stand count pretty easily right now. There's just so many applications here that work really easily. And after you're done, you can take that data back at home. You can look at it really quick, find those areas, and then go out and ground truth those areas. Maybe even determine other issues that have happened in your field that you need to involve other people. Maybe it's you need your insurance guy because a storm came through and your drone detected some areas that got some substantial damage. Well, in a couple button clicks, literally, you can send a report to your insurance agent. Here's the areas affected, and they can go out and ground truth them, right? It'd be the same thing with any chemical damage or things like that. That's pretty neat stuff. You know, and what about artificial intelligence? What about the ability to go out and count trees, for example? We know we can count plants, we can count trees. This stuff is being done all the time. And we know a lot of insurance companies now are using the systems of drones to go out and assess damages like where this tornado went through. And look, in a couple button clicks, it showed the 21 acres that was damaged by this storm. Thanks to companies like Drone Deploy, this technology will only get better, and the applications for drones are going to continue to improve, like even the use of sprayer drones that are becoming more widespread. For This Week in Agribusiness, I'm Chad Colby.
And in this fungicide application season, I have a farmer friend in the Southeast who's going to do some comparisons between drone application and traditional aerial application with aircraft. It'll be interesting to see what he's found after all is said and done. Welcome back to This Week in Agribusiness, where Charlie Behrens, with the help of the folks at Pivot Bio, is giving us a little better understanding of America's geography and its agriculture.
He is indeed, Max, and this week we're going to the Corn Belt, and Charlie's going to teach us about the only state in America with a unicameral legislature.
Huh?
The United States of America can be very different from one state to another, but one thing every state has in common is agriculture.
Hey there, I'm Charlie Behrens, and welcome to the Agricultural States of America. We're going to test your knowledge about the agriculture of different states and hopefully give you a bit of appreciation for all the great things that farmers are producing across America. Now, today we're talking about Nebraska, also known as the Cornhusker State. Now, aside from being the mascot for the University of Nebraska, the term Cornhusker comes from, as you might be able to guess, husking corn. And from there, it's safe to assume that Nebraska grows a lot of corn. Now, if you're thinking corn, boring, let me remind you that aside from your corn flakes and your corn on the cob, corn is responsible for oil, syrup, starch, fuel, and most importantly, whiskey. Nebraska is third in the nation for corn production, turning out 1.6 billion bushels of corn each year. But I bet you didn't know that a good majority of that corn actually stays in state to help feed the cattle. That's right, Nebraska's cattle get to have their corn and eat it too. Now, agriculture is Nebraska's largest industry, with the cattle business powering the economy. And that's what we call a cash cow. In fact, the state supports 19,000 cattle ranches where the cows start off on a grass-fed diet before heading to the feedlots to put on a corn-based diet. Then all you have to do is subtract the fed, add some bread, and you got a corned beef sandwich. Don't forget the pickle. Beyond cattle, farmers also raise hogs, turkeys, and chickens. They produce eggs, dairy products, and about 460,000 pounds of wool. And thank you for that, Nebraska, because what would a Midwest winter be like without wool? Not warm. So 92% of Nebraska's total land is used for agriculture. However, the most valuable resource for the state's farmers is not what's on the land, but what lies beneath it. Aquifers. And that is exactly why you don't judge a state by its corn. And for those of you still saying what? Aquifers are large, permeable bodies of rock under the Earth's surface that hold groundwater. These aquifers then allow pivot irrigation systems to deliver water to crops in an otherwise challenging climate. Having a ready source of water helps farmers avoid crop loss due to drought. Now you might be thinking, okay, sounds cool, but how much water is that anyway? Well, there's so much water under Nebraska that if it was above ground, it would have a depth of almost 38 feet. So in scientific terms, that's a lot of water. The water from the Ogallala Aquifer and the Platte River are an amazing resource, and farming in Nebraska would not be the same without them. Beyond corn, soybeans, and sorghum, Nebraska also grows hay in every single county. And in the western part of the state, you can find millet, sunflowers, wheat, and dry edible beans. Nebraska is actually the nation's leader in growing the Great Northern Bean. The Great Northern beans are very popular throughout North America. But despite their popularity, I guess a bunch of you would never realize you've even eaten them. But they are added to soups and stews and casseroles or hot dish if you're in Minnesota. Now beyond this tough Cornhusker persona, Nebraska actually has a sweet side. Take sugar beets for example. Farmers have been successfully producing sugar beets in western Nebraska for well over 100 years, thanks to the arid climate, altitude, and the ability to irrigate. Sugar beets thrive on long days with sunshine and cool nights in the western part of Nebraska. They also like long walks on the beach and curling up with a good book. What's even sweeter is that Nebraska has enough honeybee colonies to produce more than 2.7 million gallons of honey every single year. And if that doesn't satisfy your sweet tooth, they also produce around 100,000 gallons of wine each year, which reminds me it is 5 o'clock somewhere and I better get going. Anyway, that's all the time we have for now. But you can always go to pivotbio.com/agstates and click on the show icon to explore more about the agriculture of your favorite states and test your knowledge to win great prizes and more. All right, I'm Charlie Behrens, and we'll see you next time on the Agricultural States of America.
Well, Charlie Behrens filled us in with most of it. Don't ever let me question you again about your knowledge of government in the heart of the country. Unicameral legislature in Lincoln, Nebraska.
That's right. Instead of having a House and a Senate, they just have one body that represents the people of Nebraska. It's an interesting approach to government.
I am so glad that Charlie covered the beef industry so thoroughly. Otherwise, I'd be getting a note from Harry Kenobi, our friend at West Point, Nebraska. Great cattle feeder and advisor to many in agriculture. And he has those caps. He passes. I'm surprised you don't have one. Beef, it's what's for dinner. I have one of those and I wear it proudly, especially when I know I'm going to see Harry.
Absolutely. Anytime you get over there into eastern Nebraska, Max, you are in feedlot country, and I love catching up with those producers in that area. And I bet it'd be interesting this year with the moves that have been happening in the cattle market.
Yeah, Cumming County, I think, is that big area where they have all of those cattle up in the northeast part of the state.
That's right. And lots of irrigation, of course, in
and
Nebraska as well.
West Point is not in the western part of the state.
That's true. That's
it's
true.
In the east.
Yes, it is.
Of course, Ogallala is not what you expect either sometimes.
That's true as well.
A lot of interesting cities in Nebraska and some great agriculture, too. We'll be there coming up in September for Husker Harvest Days. That'll be the 12th through the 14th. There at Grand Island, west of the city of Grand Island, a central part of the state. We look forward to seeing some of you there for Husker Harvest Days. There's more coming up on This Week in Agribusiness. Stay right here with us. This Week in Agribusiness, serving America's most essential industry, is brought to you by Case IH.
Thanks for joining us here for This Week in Agribusiness. Max, it's time now to get another look at our friends from BASF for a Plan Smart, Grow Smart series.
Yeah, we enjoy sharing these visits with the viewers on This Week in Agribusiness, and some of the folks we talked to at BASF we've known for quite a few years, even before the Plan Smart, Grow Smart series. Nick Fassler, from a farm in the Midwest originally, is one of those individuals, and he shared with us how they work with growers. We know it's important to help farmers in this job, improving their performance in this biggest job on earth. How does BASF go about that?
So at BASF, we have a long history, and we've really grabbed onto this biggest job on earth title. And for me, growing up on a farm, I can really appreciate the challenges that growers look at every season when they go out in their field.
Can you share some examples with us of how you go about helping producers?
And we're really the product experts to be on hand to help our sales folks, but also our customers, retail and growers to really use our products in the best ways to ensure they're getting the efficacy they desire out of them. In our role, it's a lot about getting our hands dirty. So how do we get on the farm level, at research trials, looking at what we have to offer and tweaking that.
Watching you at work with BASF over the years, I know you take this seriously and you're excited about the opportunity. What really excites you about the future working with farmers at BASF?
For me personally, as well as for BASF, it's looking at what's the technology that we have today and how can it best be used to really enable success, and then what's the challenges or the opportunities that present themselves that we can develop new technology, new solutions, and they can take many different shapes and forms to enable success tomorrow, next year, in the coming seasons to really enable that productivity.
We often talk about the fact that a producer has only so many seasons. A farmer has 40 seasons, we often hear. How do you go about trying to help the grower maximize each of those seasons?
I think that's really key. When you think about 40 tries at something, here in research, it's all about how do you fail and fail fast to find the next solution. Whereas farmers, failure can lead to dire consequences. So for BASF, it's what are those solutions that are going to provide the most consistency and the most economical ROI to enable that grower to either grow or chase his goals. It could be high yield, it could be better quality, it could be acquiring that 40 acres down the road that he's had his eye on for the last 5 seasons. So how do you enable those next steps for that grower to be successful? And a lot of it comes down to legacy too. Grow up on a farm, I would have loved the opportunity to farm. Just wasn't in the cards that were dealt to me. But being in agriculture now, I can help growers achieve that as well.
Nick Fassler, one of the folks with BASF, they're in their operation in Research Triangle Park in North Carolina. A lot of talented individuals in that group. We love sharing the story with you. You can get more at the website plansmartgrowsmart.com. Greg Solier now brings us his farm weather forecast for the week ahead, presented by Pivot Bio Proven 40. Predictable, productive, weatherproof. Turn to a better nitrogen. Turn to Pivot Bio Proven 40. Learn more at pivotbio.com. Now we'll consult with our agriculture meteorologist. What's that? He's out of the field, you tell me? Wait a minute. That doesn't look like the field at all, Greg. Where are you?
No, and from the standpoint of meteorology, it is the field. We're out here in the elements, right here off of the Outer Banks of North Carolina, our usual little sojourn to check on the world out here at the Kitty Hawk. And very manageable. It's one of the few days, by the way, and you could probably testify to this, where it hasn't rained out here in the eastern Carolinas. Things have greened up nicely from the drought of a few months ago.
So have you fled the Canadian fire cloud? Is that what you're trying to do?
Well, we're trying. We've got a little bit of around here, but I tell you, some of those visibilities in the Great Lakes areas and the central Midwest and central Corn Belt, fractions of a mile down to a couple of miles here and there. The saving grace, by the way, of some of these stronger storms that have come through the Midwest, you kind of cleanse the atmosphere out, and some folks have at least appreciated that from an air quality standpoint.
Well, let's take a look at the map for the next week, starting with the Pacific Northwest.
We shall, in a very quiet weather picture out there. Overall, the heat continues across the Intermountain West. Let's look at those maps and charts, and here we go. Pretty much par for the course. Expectations out there. Soils are dry. 65 to 70% of the topsoil dried out over parts of Washington State and Oregon after it's been a pretty decent spring wet weather season out there. Note the warm and the storm clusters, the ridge riding storm clusters out of the Dakotas. They're there once again into the early part of the week. And later in the week, there's at least a push of some cooler air, not much organized moisture in the Pacific Northwest, as you would expect for the time of year. But those storm clusters, once they get going and ride the nose of the jet stream out of the Dakotas, the Black Hills, and head east-southeast, heads up on that for some maybe problematic weather regarding hail and high wind and severe weather potential. At least there is a push of cooler air out of Big Sky heading to the east and south. Desert Southwest so far, an absence of the monsoon season in that particular part of the country. Maybe a couple of dry-based thunderstorms. We do have fire concerns and fires that have broken out into sections of southwestern New Mexico. Some dry-based thunderstorms across the four quarters, and there is heat, and there has been plenty of it. A detriment to cotton and livestock operations into the Lone Star State. We've seen some easing of that farther east, but the heat continues on in the western sections of Texas. The thunderstorm clusters, boy, there's been significant drought improvement over the western reaches of Kansas and Nebraska and into the high plains areas. That storm pattern continues on. A couple of thunderstorms in the desert southwest high base and a pretty quiet weather picture, as you would expect, into the valleys of California. More seasonal temperatures there, Max.
Let's look right through the heart of the country quickly to see what you forecast for that region.
Boy, busy, active, and moisture-laden. How's that in the midst of a drought-ridden weather pattern for the Corn Belt? Maps and charts have cool air to the north, heat down through the central and southern plains, west to east along that boundary, a series of lows into the early parts of the week. Thunderstorm clusters, heavy and severe, recurring and repeating in nature. Middle to late portions of the week anticipated from the Black Hills to the Corn Palace Sioux Empire region, right along that warm front to the Ohio Valley. Multi-inch rains are possible along with severe weather potential. The problem with these rains, you want an organization to them, you come up with hail and high wind, reports of that already, and probably some crop damage too. Onto the southern plains we go. There's that triple-digit hot dome of high pressure over Texas. Some easing of temperatures in the lower Mississippi Valley, but storm clusters there as well. Tropics are quiet, likely to stay that way into the western Gulf of Mexico. We're going to keep an eye on the Pacific, Max. Things may begin to drift into Old Mexico and move northeastward in the weeks to come.
Show us that eastern part of the country. Maybe some rain there before you get out of there?
Oh, yeah, probably back into play later on into the week across the Corn Belt locales. Boy, the busy weather pattern continues on. One frontal boundary out of the eastern complex into the northeast of New England. Here's that warm front and those ridge riding rim of fire, ring of fire storm clusters out of the western Corn Belt and in the Ohio Valley. Multi-inch downpours, heavy and severe, but you want organized rains from anything apart from a tropical setup. That is the story. Southeastern states, plenty of heat and humidity, mostly suppressed in through Texas. And the wet weather, as you pointed out, both early and later in the week. Showers and thunderstorms back in the forecast. The tropical Atlantic for now is quiet.
Greg Solier is back with his extended farm weather forecast for the country, presented by Pivot BioProven 40. Predictable, productive, weatherproof. Turn to a better nitrogen. Turn to Pivot BioProven 40. Learn more at pivotbio.com. I can almost smell the sunscreen now as we head back to Greg Solier along the Atlantic coast in North Carolina. Tell Jacob not to pan down. We don't want to see your Speedo, Greg.
Yes, heaven forbid that sent everyone to the hills. Yes, camera crew includes Jacob, Christopher, and management over here at the pier would be the wife, Christine. So, yeah, a little away from the weather office action and never really put the maps and charts down. I tell you, Max, it has been a busy one. You wanted rain, you're getting it across the plains and those drought areas in the Corn Belt, too.
Let's look at your precip amounts for the week ahead.
Yes, it's a kind of a down the middle look at the precip chart here. Here it is, and generally in a more conservative note, and I'm sure you can take these numbers out of some of the stronger thunderstorms and come up with a double and triple that. And the problem with rains this time of the year, where they recur, repeat, and call it a wetter weather pattern, well, it comes at a price with severe weather potential in many areas of the plains and the Corn Belt to the Ohio Valley, at least an inch or two, maybe some spots 3 or 4. Talked on the radio, maybe close to 5 inches in some locales. In any event, heads up, hail and high wind and hail. It's a problem this time of the year, let alone in a drought setup across our sections of the Corn Belt. The moisture to the eastern states as the week wears on, not much going on in West Texas. And Max, look at the low coming up out of Baja. It's an El Nino year. Things are quieting down the open waters of the Atlantic. The Pacific, though, getting busy. We'll wonder if that comes up into play here in the longer range maps and charts with moisture for the southern plains.
What kind of warmth do you see there that week of July 10th?
Here we go into July, and the temperature pattern is a little more conducive to comfort, easing the stress out there, so to speak. on the back 40. Some of that drop in temperature much welcome and noted into West Texas, the core of the heat southeast and over the western parts of the country. Moisture-wise, looky here, a tropical low, one in the Atlantic of no bearing. One coming up Baja brings old moisture through Mexico, Texas, and look at the wet weather pattern with the trough across the middle part of the country as far east as Ohio, as far west as the Divide. Going to be a busy one for that stretch in July.
Before you go into the week of July 17th, I want to just point out that you were talking about this shift many weeks ago here on This Week in Agribusiness.
That's right. As we talked about, this will not be that as in the drought the way the entire summer season goes. And it's amazing that we've been able to make improvement on the drought pattern too across the plains. We'll tell you what, let's take a look at temperatures across the country, and it continues to be fairly manageable across parts of the heartland, seasonal to a little below across the Canadian prairie, northern interior states. The heat is typical, normal, a little above average. Southern plains into the eastern states, nothing out of control. Look at the moisture pattern out of the southwest. That's not the monsoon setup, that's tropics. The wet weather pattern continues over the east and northern parts of the country too.
How do you see the week of July 24th?
Here we go into temperatures, my friend, and the cool air continues north. The heat over the southeastern part of the country. Wet weather in the southwest and no shortage of moisture from the northern Rockies into the plains and Corn Belt too.
Next on This Week in Agribusiness, it's Max's Tractor Shed, spotlighting another great American tractor.
Well, the other day on my Facebook page, Max Armstrong's Tractor Stuff, I said, show me your old tractor radio, the Fender radio. And so many people did, we might have to stretch this into another week. I'll show you some of those that came forward in Max's Tractor Shed. It's brought to you by Mystic Lubricants. Mystic Lubricants farmers are made to make it last. Well, back in the day, before the quiet, comfortable cabs on tractors, when we had those open platforms, it was really something when you got a radio out there, and they were quite often mounted over there on the fender, and you see it was AM and FM in this particular instance. Well, it was just AM back in the early days, and there might have been a disagreement from time to time between Dad and the offspring working in the field. Dad perhaps wanted to catch the farm report on WGN Chicago. The son might have been wanting to listen to Top 40 radio on WLS Chicago. Or Dad maybe wanted to tune to WJR Detroit to hear Ernie Harwell and the Tigers. And the son maybe was listening to CKLW out of Windsor, Ontario. But that world was coming to the platform of the old tractor thanks to these old tractor radios. Let me show you some that folks shared with me the other day. How about this Central Illinois John Deere radio? Darren Bass in Central Illinois has this Deere Fender radio for a 4020. And then Bill Foster in Missouri has a massive Ferguson tractor radio, and it's mounted on an Oliver. And my friend Zach Smith in North Carolina has shown me a bunch of tractor radios he has, all Fords, of course, and there's even one in a display box that he has. So, yeah, we came a long ways in comfort out of the tractor, as well as information and entertainment by all means. Let's find out what's selling at Big Iron Auctions. Mark Stock checks in with us to bring us his weekly report.
Well, Max, we want to wish everyone a very happy and safe 4th of July. And there's nothing more American than parades around the 4th of July in small town America, looking at all of the floats, the high school bands, and of course, the classic cars. And there's going to be a lot of fireworks on our Monday, July 17th, online, no reserve collector car auction. Sullivan Auctioneers, Carthage, Illinois location will sell over 300 collector cars. There will be a 7-day open house preview of all the vehicles the week prior to the auction. Selling a 1957 Chevy Bel Air 4-door hardtop, a 1968 Ford Shelby GT 500 Mustang with the police interceptor, and a Marty report. The O'Toole collection includes one of 130 Oldsmobile Hearst pace cars produced in 1972, selling on this sale. Also featuring a 1970 Plymouth Superbird matching numbers car. There's a documented matching numbers 1970 Dodge Challenger RT with a 440 V8 4-speed. the Bill Myers Estate will be selling their Pontiac GTO car collection. Also selling a 1957 Chevy two-door sedan from the Bill Myers Estate. Check out these classic cars selling with no reserve July 17th. Happy 4th of July.
Our FFA Chapter Tribute is brought to you by Pioneer, developing new generations of seed innovations for new generations of farmers. Pioneer, what's next happens here. Now we're going to talk to that next generation of agricultural leader. Joining us this week is Colton Roy. He's currently serving as the president of the Missouri FFA. And Colton, thanks for joining us this week.
Yeah, not a problem. I'm glad to be here.
Let's talk a little bit about what prompted you to join FFA. Colton, what was it?
Well, coming from a rural agricultural community, I had a little bit of exposure to the industry, but not anything on too big of a level. So whenever I got to high school, my cousins had kind of been involved in FFA whenever they were high schoolers as well. So I decided to follow in their footsteps, and it wasn't too long before I fell in love with the organization. So I'm really glad that I decided to take that step.
So you fell in love with the organization, began working with your chapter, and then at some point, Colton, you decided to run for state leadership. What was it that made you want to take that step?
Originally, my advisor had pushed me to. It's something that I had been interested in for a little bit, but I'd never given too much consideration. However, whenever I was at the Public Speaking Academy, my junior year, I ran into a student that had a really big impact on my life, and I kind of, for the first time, stopped being a member taking from the organization and kind of stepped into that leadership role and helped guide him through the academy a little bit. And so I realized that it was something I really enjoyed and that I was capable of doing, so I took it to the next level.
And so now you are serving president of Missouri FFA. Colton, what are you looking forward to as the school year moves on?
Well, our convention is in 13 days, so we're wrapping up the end of my term, and I think it'll be really exciting to see all of the members come back together in Columbia and see their successes that they've had throughout the year, and then also watch the new team take on their role and just kind of follow along with them and see what impact they make throughout their year.
Colton, what advice would you have for folks who maybe haven't looked at FFA and need some help?
I think that it's important to take advantage of every single opportunity that you have to kind of find out what you like and also to stay authentic to who you are. There's no stereotypical mold of an FFA member, and that's something that it took quite a while for me to figure out, but after I realized it, anyone can be a part of this organization and there's something within it for everyone. And I think that's something that we need to talk about a little bit more so that more students can take advantage of the opportunities that we have here.
That is so true. There are some fantastic opportunities. Colton, do you hope to stay in the ag industry?
Yes, after graduation, I plan to go to law school, and then I want to return to a rural community and practice agricultural estate law with a focus in farm succession planning.
Well, we wish you the best, folks. That's Colton Roy, president of Missouri State FFA. Before we leave for this weekend, Max, we've got a moment here, and I noticed over the past week you've been recounting a lot of your stories in the world of ag media, and my goodness, you have had quite a career.
I posted the other day on Facebook what a wonderful ride it has been. 48 years in farm broadcasting, 52, Michael, since I first walked into a radio station when I was in high school to sit down and operate at the board. In that studio, there was an International Harvester air conditioner back over my shoulder. The mic pointed right at the announcer and the air conditioner, so every time that mic was opened on a hot day in August, you could hear that rumble, the IH air conditioner.
The IH sound in the background has been there for Max Armstrong's career, which has been for a long time in Chicago. Max?
Yeah, I was very, very fortunate to spend 31 years full-time, worked at WGN Radio and Television in Chicago, and of course many of those years with Orient. Orient and I have been business partners for 45 years.
Wow.
And I'm sure it seemed like much longer to him, by all means, but yeah, we were very fortunate. We're in our 18th season of This Week in Agribusiness. I've spent the last 14 years as a part of the team of the Farm Progress folks. Just a great agriculture media organization, a giant organization with the Farm Progress Show. The folks at Informa also put together the Husker Harvest Day show in Nebraska. And it's just a great organization. We've been privileged to work with Don Torty and Jeff Jackson. We've made a pretty good team there, I think.
There has been a great group of folks, Max. But of course, you spent a lot of that time traveling in your world in ag journalism. You had some great stories.
You know, I was writing down the other day, taking a little bit of an accounting of how many flights I've been on over the years. Now, some of those were commuting from our home to work through the years. There have been more than 800 flights. Now, not all those were commercial flights, many on private planes. Orion had a plane for 40 years. Air Orion, it was called. The tail number was 6184C, and many of the air traffic controllers knew the number.
Absolutely. They'd see them all over the skies, I'd imagine.
Yeah, they would hear Orion talking about it from time to time. And then some of those flights actually were on Air Force jets back in the early 80s. We traveled with the Secretary of Agriculture, and so it was kind of neat to be sitting in one of those planes, medevac planes they were called, where the seats were all facing backwards. And,
ooh, different sensations, I'd suppose, in the air.
Yeah, it really was. Presumably it was safer flying back there, but it was a great opportunity. You know, we've been out on farms and ranches all over America, so blessed to be able to be a part. I think many farm families have looked at us as part of their families, and what a wonderful compliment. We look at them the same way too, so we say thanks. If you'll allow me to be your substitute from time to time, I'll be most graciously thankful for that.
I would appreciate that tremendously, Max, and of course we're going to see you at Farm Progress and at Husker?
Absolutely, I'll be there every hour of every day at the Farm Progress Show and the Half Century of Progress, and we look forward to going to Grand Island too.
So much coming this summer.
That's right. We hope you folks will be here with us. I'll be here with the Tractor Shed and keeping an eye on this guy from afar. Join us on This Week in Agribusiness. Thank you. So long. This Week in Agribusiness is brought to you by Case IH. This Week in Agribusiness is produced by Omax Communications in association with 22 Creative Group. We invite you to visit us online at agbizweek.com.